A little while ago, while I was perusing the internet of the transport and rail fanning groups I am a member of, I happened to come across this amusing picture of a brand new sign on a SEPTA station where the name Philadelphia was spelled wrong. While most of us had ourselves a nice little chuckle and either moved on or proceeded to mock and deride SEPTA in the comments sections, the thing that perhaps caught my attention the most was not so much the picture, but rather where it was taken. And that's because this was the first time that I seriously realized that the station that this was taken at, Conshohocken Station on SEPTA's Manayunk-Norristown line, was getting a complete rebuild. And not only that, it was being done in one of the most dramatic turnarounds I've seen in a station in quite a while, maybe since Wawa Station last year, as well as the Claymont Transit Center on the Wilmington-Newark line / Northeast Corridor. Most crucially for me though, alongside literally everything getting better, the station has a high-level platform that allows for people to board the trains without having to navigate a flight of stairs to do so, what we in the biz call level boarding. This is something that, if you talk to almost every transit advocate out there, at least in the US, it is one thing that they will always clamor for if it hasn't been done already. Most often, the big reason cited is that level boarding allows the station and the trains themselves to be accessible by people in wheelchairs and by other people with disabilities. This is absolutely true. However, I feel as though there are a lot of benefits to having level boarding that often go underregarded into providing a good service on your transit network. To demonstrate this, a couple of times lately, I made a couple of trips up to Conchi to see the new station for myself, and to get a feel of what a good station that is functional and accessible to all can be, as well as what it means for your station to be nice, and why that may matter a bit more than you might think. Now, when it comes to the topic of level boarding and why it is a benefit to us all, I'd like to start this video by talking about something that seems unrelated but really isn't upon reflection: the humble curb cut. At many intersections in towns, cities, and really almost anywhere, if you walk along the sidewalk, you'll notice that the curb will often turn into a small ramp that allows people to descend to street level and cross as if it were a ramp rather than a step on a staircase. Obviously, this much gentler gradient is very definitely appreciated by wheelchair users, but it is quietly appreciated by able-bodied people all the same. In fact, the first examples of these were introduced in the UK in the 1930s to allow mothers to cross safely with their baby strollers, and later examples in the 1940s were made to help World War II veterans who received disabilities from their injuries in battle. Over time though, more and more people came to appreciate this concept, from people with disabilities to people pushing a heavy load on a cart to just your average Joe who doesn't want to be too hard on their legs, or that guy or girl who trips on almost everything and as such has come to hate curbs with a fiery passion. As such, the curb cut was pretty much made a mandatory item for all sidewalk renovations in the US under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1991, often known simply as the ADA. In the intervening years since their introduction, though, the term the curb cut effect was coined to describe the phenomenon that features that are built to be disabled friendly are seen as being useful to all, and as such are seen as just the standard, rather than an exception that is made for those that need it. This obviously applies to a lot of things that may slip under your radar, from the automatic doors at the grocery store, to the ramps that go up to the front door of a lot of buildings, to the ability of a city bus to lower its right front side, kneeling as it's called, to make it easier for people to board. If one were to make a concerted effort to look for it, you can find examples of the curb cut effect in a lot of places, and you'll quietly be thanking it for oftentimes providing either a useful way of assisting you, or for merely being the path of least resistance. So with that said, Conshohocken, a name that almost everyone who has ever listened to a traffic report in the Philly area will have heard, and locals have baked into their skulls even if they've never set foot in the town. And for one good reason.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
Conshohocken. The name itself comes from Umani, an Algonquin Native American language, and roughly translated it means Pleasant Valley. but to a lot of people here in the Philadelphia region, they don't particularly find it all that pleasant. Not so much for the town itself and its 9,000 inhabitants, its office buildings, and a lot of restaurants around here, in fact, are quite good. In fact, many would say it's quite a nice place. But they say it more so for what's across the Schuylkill River from here. In particular, the road that they so often have to travel on past here to get to Center City, Philadelphia itself. And that's I-76, the Schuylkill Expressway. And in particular, one name associated with that highway that you hear all the time on the traffic reports, the Conshohocken Curve. One of those places where traffic jams are eternal, and there's really not much you can do to fix it, at least as far as fixing up the road is concerned. You can't really expand the freeway at all, and even then, freeway expansions are known to not fix traffic in the first place. In fact, they make it worse. So an obvious solution is to encourage people to use other ways or other modes of transportation, in fact. And in fact, there is one that exists through Conshohocken itself. It's existed long before the freeway ever existed and can carry a lot more people, a lot more comfortably, and in fact, just recently, one bit of it through the town itself has just gotten a major upgrade. So much so that I definitely think it's worth a look. Let's have a look itself.
And this is it, the SEPTA Manayunk-Norristown line.
Completed on its initial segment between Philadelphia and Norristown in 1834 by the fittingly named Philadelphia, Germantown, and Norristown Railroad, the line would eventually become the southernmost segment of the original main line of the much more famous Philadelphia and Reading Railroad, or the Reading. Not only would this route link the railroad's two namesake cities of Philly and Reading, but it would continue as far north as Pottsville before branching to serve the long, lucrative, and productive coal fields of northeastern PA. However, alongside their lucrative coal and general freight haulage, the Reading would also run passenger services along this route too, including intercity named trains like the Schuylkill and the King Coal, yes, that's what it was actually called, and importantly, the main service that has survived to the modern day, the electrified commuter services, with the line being electrified as far as Norristown in 1933. This would be the service that would survive the bankruptcy of the Reading in 1971, the merger of the Reading into Conrail in 1976, and would be handed over to SEPTA in 1983, in a past not too dissimilar to the Westchester line I talked about in my first video. Today, it still retains its vital role as a commuter line between Philadelphia and its northern suburbs and neighborhoods, but I'll reserve a full description of the line itself and what can be done to make it so much better, and the entire SEPTA system for that matter, for future videos. However, I will note that parts of the line are surprisingly scenic along the Schuylkill leading up to Conshohocken, so much so that I personally think it's SEPTA's prettiest line to ride on. So with that said, what about Conshohocken Station? Built pretty much in conjunction with the establishment of what would become Conshohocken itself, the station always was a very much humble stop for the industrial suburb that the town would become. However, when train service in the region saw a period of decline between the 60s and the 80s, the station would eventually become what we've seen for a little while now. A small parking lot underneath the overpass for Fayette Street, with a patch of asphalt as the platform, a small shed as a ticket office, a bus shelter, a trailer as a waiting room, which being SEPTA is only open during morning rush hour, even if you have a key card, which is kinda dumb, and for the station's facilities, a port-a-potty. I only wish I was joking. And perhaps all the more frustrating is that since the platform was just a patch of asphalt, there was no level boarding, not even a ramp specifically for wheelchair users. And that, plus the fact that the track was curved at the station and slightly banked, meant that getting on the train at the old station was all the more awkward, as I shall demonstrate here. As you may or may not have been able to tell, I almost lost balance for a second. Probably more because I was focused on keeping the camera steady, but the whole situation made it just that bit more awkward. And while that is certainly a minor inconvenience for me as someone fit and able-bodied, for people who are, well, not me, it could easily be more of an obstruction to a good ridership experience, or even an obstruction to using public transport altogether. So as I'm sure you can glean from my experiences at the old Conshohocken station, getting on the train itself was ranging anywhere from a nuisance to an impossibility. And thankfully, that's something that the new station at Conchi fixes quite well. There are stairs to get to the platform for those who want to use them, but there are also ramps for those who need or want to use them as well, including people who don't use wheelchairs or mobility devices. The new station not only has the parking facilities of the previous one, but also racks for bicycles, which, despite the hills that this part of the Schuylkill Valley is known for, seems to be gaining a degree of popularity for getting around the town, as well as the adjacent Schuylkill River Trail, which you can access right off of the northbound platform. Access from one side of the tracks to the other, while it does rely on you heading out of the station and crossing the tracks at the crossing of Oak Road instead of an under or overpass, is still a damn sight better than the old one that, while it had an option for an overpass, was one that went a lot longer than necessary and put you right next to a major roadway and all of the joys that that brings, especially in an area so infamous for traffic. And of course, on those literal rainy days, the shelters on either side, including the one where that famous misspelled sign once was, they fixed it by the way, as well as the newly built station house for use in rush hours, definitely makes waiting for your train a much better overall experience than it once was. It's definitely no recreation of the old Reading terminal, but it's certainly a nicer station and one more fitting to be a community fixture going forward. And all this is to say nothing of the fact that having level boarding allows for the boarding process of the trains to be done much faster, since instead of several steps up the stairs to board the train, you just take a single step and you're on board, shaving a not inconsiderable amount of dwell time at busy stops, and therefore being a component to better schedule keeping and reduce delays. So it's pretty obvious that this new station is a massive improvement over what had come previously. And if your station is very similar to the old Conshohocken station, like this one, or this one, or this one, you may be asking yourself, what would it take to make these upgrades to your station that are literally better for everybody involved? Well, there are a few things, including some things that local communities may protest against, which I'll get to in a minute. But first, I think it's important to understand the magnitude of the task at hand to get all the stations on the SEPTA network to have high-level platforms, which is really the most important improvement to make for any station renovation going forward. The main thing to understand here is just how few stations on the SEPTA network have high-level platforms at this point. SEPTA's regional rail network consists of 155 stations on 13 rail lines. With the opening of both Conshohocken and the newly built Claymont Transportation Center in Delaware replacing the old Claymont station on the Wilmington-Newark line, of those 155 stations, only 46 of them are fully accessible with high-level platforms, which is only about 30%, which thankfully include all the stations directly serving Center City, which you would reasonably expect. Another 36 stations have low-level platforms, but wheelchair accessibility is available with special ramps for passengers to achieve level boarding, which is fine, but it does require the crew to take extra measures to accommodate them, more so than if the platform was simply all level with the doors. And although 20 stations on the network are slated to get upgrades to their platforms to help the cause along, the expected timelines vary wildly, to completion within the next year to the completion in the middle of the next decade. No, that's not even a joke. Just look at this. And this is not for some typical whistle stop either. This is for Glenside, a major junction point on the network and the end terminus for trains on the airport line. And it's not getting a high-level platform until 2034, 11 years from now. All of this is to say, 52% of SEPTA stations have wheelchair accessibility, but only 30% have full high-level platforms.
As for the remaining 57 stations on the network,
well, yes, you're stuck getting a bus to a station that actually has a wheelchair-accessible platform, unless you live along the Chestnut Hill East line, in which case, you're totally screwed. But I mean, thankfully the Chestnut Hill West line is right next door, and it totally doesn't have any problems of its own. Totally. Oh, but don't worry, improvements are also being made, and stations on the Chestnut Hill East line will start to get high-level platforms between 2026 and 2034, and on only 3 stations.
Bruh.
Okay, so why is progress on this so glacial when it seems like something that should be pretty straightforward in a lot of cases? Well, a common recurring theme of SEPTA is always in play in cases like this, and that's the fact that SEPTA is chronically underfunded, to the point that it's often considered one of the most underfunded transit agencies for any major city in the country. So in order to improve any station on the network, there has to be more political will, not just at the state, regional, and city level, but also at the local level to get things started, or that the station is of such importance that the project becomes mandatory, which recently became true for one particularly important station on the network.
Welcome to Cornwell's Heights Station in Bensalem Township. It's a stop on the SEPTA Trenton line, or as it's otherwise more commonly known, and as this Acela about to go by here is about to demonstrate, it's the Northeast Corridor.
As one may notice, there isn't too much to see here, unless you like watching traffic on Interstate 95. And that's because Cornwell's Heights Station is the quintessential park and ride station. Built out to what it is now due to construction on Interstate 95 in the late 90s, this station and its enormous parking lot is generally considered to be the busiest station on the SEPTA Regional Rail network outside of Center City, seeing 1,500 riders a day in 2017, which I'm sure has taken a dip recently, but still substantial. And this is to say nothing of the few passengers that ride the occasional Amtrak Keystone Service train that stops here, running between New York, Philly, and Harrisburg.
Now, naturally, this station has a lot to consider going forward for its functionality, as even though this footage was filmed on a Sunday, the vast empty parking lots and the out-of-service shuttle buses just scream waste of long-term potential.
However, in the more immediate future, there is one thing to consider. This station does not have a high-level platform. Yet. While at the very least it has ramps to allow for wheelchair access, not all share in that benefit. At least, not for now. In November 2023, it was announced that, with the help of federal infrastructure funds, SEPTA and Amtrak would undertake a renovation of Cornwell's Heights valued at $55 million, and will of course see the construction of high-level platforms, among other benefits that have yet to be named.
And among which I do hope one of them is something a lot better than that shed over there as the station house during rush hours. Seriously, these sorts of things are fairly common for SEPTA. I don't know why. But needless to say, Cornwell's Heights is definitely one of the lowest hanging fruits out there to implement these upgrades.
It's fantastic that Cornwell's Heights is going to get these upgrades, even if no timeline has yet been announced for the completion of the project. But one key thing that really seems to help Cornwell's Heights' case along here is the fact that the section of track that it runs along is pretty straight, as you can probably tell. And that's more important than you may at first think, since in order for a station to be fully ADA compliant, the platform has to be right up level with the doors of the train. And you really can't do that very well on a curve, since the cars really can't follow the contrails of the curve itself, and more often than not, the curves are banked when they do that. And that becomes more of an issue for some other stations on the line, like the next one that we're about to see. Welcome to Mount Airy Station on the Chestnut Hill East Line. Built in 1875 and designed by the famed architect Frank Furness, this station is considered to be one of the architectural gems of the SEPTA network, and looking at the beautiful station building here, it's not hard to see why people would think that. But here at Mount Airy, one of the main problems with making a lot of SEPTA stations ADA compliant becomes abundantly clear, since, as you'll notice, the station is built on a curve in the track, and that's actually a major problem. Because if you build a high-level platform on a curve in the track, the cars of the train simply can't curve in the middle to meet them. So what will often happen is that the doors of the train will open up to a gap, dropping down to the bottom, down to the tracks themselves, which can be a big problem because if you miss your step, or even if you're in a wheelchair, you could easily fall onto the track, making a high-level platform possibly more dangerous than if you just had a low-level platform here. Needless to say, for a lot of stations that share these problems, that could easily be a non-starter. And it's why if you're going to build an ADA accessible platform here, one of the best options is to outright build a new station, which if you consider costs and also the substantial resistance that may come from a neighborhood as dense as this, it may well become questionable as to its worth. But unfortunately, it could mean decades from now, this beautiful station behind me could either be a relic of a time gone by with little use, or just outright become something different entirely. And frankly, I'd hate to see it for a place like this. And all this isn't even taking into account the weird edge cases that are out there that pretty much forbids the use of building a cookie cutter station. And one example is here at the beautiful little Kinwood station, the end of the line for the small Kinwood line, the shortest route on SEPTA's regional rail network. Now, at first glance to an untrained eye, it may not look like there's much to consider here. You just build the high-level platforms and it's good to go. But all that falls out the window when you consider what's beyond the station here.
This is the Kinwood Heritage Trail, a popular walking and cycling path in the area built on the former right-of-way of the old Pennsylvania Railroad Schuylkill branch that became the Kinwood Line. And this station serves as a fitting starting point for the trail and connection to the neighborhoods surrounding it. Because of all of this, any prospective renovation project at Kinwood needs to consider connections to the trail, and with high-level platforms in place, that sadly does become more complicated given the locale. Thankfully, looking at the surroundings overall, I do believe that solutions can be found for this problem. But it goes to show that while some stations will be easy to make this crucial upgrade, others will be a big challenge in one facet, another, or multiple. It's obviously not a one-size-fits-all problem, which only makes implementing a widespread plan more challenging, especially to leadership who are not used to such projects and therefore rely on contractors and consultants to do the grunt work for them. And this, combined with the aforementioned budget problems, basically forces SEPTA to pick and choose which stations to upgrade, rather than implement a sweeping system-wide plan that can be done in a quicker time frame. And regional rail is one thing, but SEPTA's other rail services are another area where upgrades to improve accessibility are needed too, including the Market Frankfurt and Broad Street Line subways, the Norristown High-Speed Line, and the trolley routes. While the trolley stops are being worked on with the procurement of new vehicles and station upgrades associated with them, and I have a video in the works specifically on that, keep an eye out for it, the two subway lines fall into the same category as regional rail in that it's definitely not one size fits all. An example here is the work being done at 30th Street Station, both the 30th Street Station that we know and love, but also 30th Street Station on the Market Frankfurt line. Not only is the station getting a nice new coat of paint, but also new elevators to improve accessibility to the underground platform. And in the pipeline is the refit and reopening of an old connecting tunnel that connected 30th Street Station to the Market Frankfurt line until the 1980s, which will make going from your Amtrak train or SEPTA regional rail train to a service on the L far easier than having to brave crossing Market Street and walking an extra block to enter the station. Seriously, why did they ever get rid of that tunnel? Other projects in the works include the recent completion of ADA upgrades to Susquehanna Dolphin Station on the Broad Street line, and work has begun recently on similar upgrades, including new elevators at Tasker Morris Station on the Broad Street line. At the very least, the stations on both the subway lines and the Norristown High-Speed line as well are all easier in principle to improve upon, since not only are they all on straight sections of track, they also have high-level platforms to begin with the upgrades to these stations mainly focusing on allowing for ease of access to the high-level platforms such as elevators, ramps, and lifts. It is true that in a compact and often subterranean environment this can be more difficult, but at the very least the project is not burdened by needing to consider surrounding land use and other minutiae, since that grunt work was done long ago when the subway lines were built. Overall, the Market Frankfurt and Broad Street lines and any other subway or prospective subway in Philly is worth its own discussion, but alongside the needs to improve accessibility, it is good to see that one of the aspects that's also being considered are those of the passenger experience by way of wayfinding upgrades that SEPTA is currently working on, along with rebranding their city rail lines, both trolley and subway alike, alongside general updates to improve aesthetics and station identity. It's no doubt that Philly subways have a contentious reputation, to put it mildly, and it will take more than just a facelift to improve it. But there is little doubt to me that this kind of improvement to stations that make the ridership experience that little bit more appealing and not making you think you're sitting in a musky, unkempt tunnel waiting for your train with the occasional puffs of smoke floating around from your fellow passengers, it will be a component of making the subways worthy of a great city once again. But upgrading the regional rail will still be the biggest challenge in bringing the network to a state where it is truly accessible to all. And it is but one of many challenges that SEPTA faces to bring the system to a state that it wants to be at, where it can be the reliable cornerstone of Philadelphia's transportation and those of its surrounding communities. And building accessible platforms, while a major part of it, should not be the only part. A station deserves to be a place in and of itself, where one can wait for the train, sure, but to do so in a relaxing way, rain or shine. To me, that means one of the biggest areas that needs to be considered in the long-range game is for the station houses themselves. I mentioned earlier that the lounge at the old Conshohocken station was only open to the public during the morning rush hour. That's still true even with the new station as well, and every other SEPTA station that's not in Center City. Even if you have a key card, it's still locked in the vast majority of cases. This is infuriating for a lot of reasons. In fact, when I was waiting for my train home after filming at the new station, I overheard a couple of passengers express their frustration with the station building not being open. As they did, they mentioned the fact that because the station is unstaffed the majority of the time, except in the morning rush, that security and rider safety could be a reason why that is. However, in that conversation, that was quickly followed by a counterpoint. We're in Conshohocken. This is far less likely to be a place where that sort of situation would be a problem compared to a station like, say, North Broad or Allegheny. That's Allegheny on the Market-Frankford line. In the vast majority of circumstances, if the station is open to people who have a key card at the very least, it would likely be fine to just find a seat in the station building, get yourself out of the cold of the winter or the sweltering heat of the summer, and probably best of all, use the bathroom. The latter would definitely be important, considering that no SEPTA trains have onboard bathrooms, and future rolling stock is unlikely to get it anytime soon. More on that in a future video. This is why, alongside accessibility needs for future stations, quality of life improvements are desperately needed as well to improve rider satisfaction. And the thing is, this is not insurmountable either. The grunt work, which is the infrastructure itself, is already there or it's getting built, at least in about half the cases. In a lot of ways, it's similar to their recent implementation of train timers on the boards at the stations on the Market-Frankford line. The equipment is there, you just need to implement the program to make it work, and you're improving the quality of life for the riders by default. The only thing they have to do here is to allow the key card to deactivate the lock, and voila, you enable a better ridership experience. And speaking of key cards, I also argue that there really is very little reason why every station should not have vending machines for key cards and quick trip tickets. For anyone who has never ridden SEPTA, yes, we do not have ticket machines outside of the major stations. You pay for your tickets on board the train with the conductor. Adding actual ticket machines makes those wanting to take a quick trip have an easy and understandable way to pay their fare, and it also allows for people who want to get a key card, warts and all, to not have to make a trip all the way to Center City and get the card at the ticket offices at 30th Street, Jefferson, or suburban stations. Plus, I would argue that the former point in particular makes the job of the train conductors easier, since they don't have to dispense the tickets on the trains themselves and can focus more on checking the tickets and operating the train. Also, yes, I'm one of those people who was low-key kinda sad there wasn't a mini Wawa at the new Wawa station. I mean, I know I'd never really expect that, but that would just be cool and really nice for commuters. I mean, crucially, you'd be able to get a coffee, which I think a lot of people would consider a win. If not them, maybe a Dunkin' at some stations? What was I going on about? Never mind. But why devote an entire video to this topic? Well, maybe I can demonstrate by describing the lament of something near to my heart. This is my home station, Media Station, on the eponymous Media Wawa line. You look at it today, a low-level platform with ramps, a nondescript building as a station house that one could easily confuse with a maintenance building, and while the town it serves is great and all, it really doesn't give a sense that this is a deserving gateway to my hometown. However, This is what Media Station used to look like until the late 1950s. This, in the eyes of many, would be a station that one would be proud to call their own. And while it was still a low-level platform, allow me to draw your attention to one thing that is easy to miss when you only look at the beautiful station building. If you look to the left on the outbound platform, you'll notice a staircase leading up to Orange Street, which takes you into town. That staircase doesn't exist anymore. Instead, one has to wait until the train leaves, then walk across the tracks, head up the stairs, and onto Orange Street. Alongside the obvious sentimentality of losing a beautiful building, it's the little things we lost along the way that also make it not just tragic, but frustrating. But communities like Media, Conshohocken, and more have chances at greater things. It's reliant on not just the agency's drive to make things better, but the communities that they serve as well. And that can start not only with decisions by board members and executives, but by you and your neighbors too. Not only can a nice station be nice to look at, but nice to use and helpful to those around you at the same time. And that becomes one of the little things that makes a journey a little bit nicer. And you become a little bit more grateful that it exists to serve you. As much as we transport nerds love to grandstand about service expansions and new equipment, myself included of course, improving what you already have is a must to give you a stronger foundation, from service improvements to new rolling stock to, yes, even improving the stations. And that change is worth the effort, and people are realizing that with each new renovation. Because if Conshohocken Station can go from this to this, then it shows that better things are indeed possible for how we get around Philly.